said a hip replacement. I was wondering what he
I saw Kenny died. Yeah, Kenny died.
I want to welcome you all tonight. We're glad to see so many faces here. Our speaker tonight, as you probably all know, is Judee DeFiccio, and she draws a crowd. And so she has an entourage here of the DeFiccio family that she will introduce. But just a little bit about Judee is that she graduated from St. Joseph's High School in 1983, and from there to the Rutgers College of Pharmacy in 1988. Some of the board that she has served on is the Atlantic County Board of Ag. She's a member of the Lions Club, and she is a multitask person. She not only has a full-time job as a pharmacist, but she operates a retail produce operation in Trenton, plus running in the spare time a 200-acre fruit and vegetable farm. 100 acres, okay. And so anyway, it's a great pleasure that I'm pleased to introduce Judee. And Judee, here you go.
First of all, I want to thank Bill and the Historical Society for asking us to do this. It's quite an honor, and I'm really happy to do it. And even more happy that the whole family is here. So the entire DeFiccio grandchildren clan is available tonight. We're going to depend on, this is my cousin Lorian, came all the way from Virginia, my Aunt Ginny's daughter. She's going to take care of most of the presentation tonight. This is my cousin Bob DeFiccio, my cousin Joe DeFiccio, my cousin Don DeFiccio, Jerry DeFiccio, and Bridget DeFiccio. I do it, so there you go. And next to Bridget is Jerry's wife, Fran. Coming towards me is Bill, Lorian's husband, Bill Rhodes. And behind us is the other Judee DeFiccio, Don's wife, Judy. Okay, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Lorian, and here you go.
Thank you very much. As Judee said, this is not just an honor, but it has been wonderful to be able to reminisce and remember as we've gone through these pictures. This has been such a fun project for all of us. I was the oldest of the grandchildren. I still am the oldest. And, but it was so great to go through all these pictures and remember all of the good times. So thank you very much for prompting us to do this ourselves. Okay, we'll start out with a little introduction to my grandfather's family. Joseph David DeFiccio, who would be my grandfather, senior, was the oldest son of Dominic and Mary Del Duca DeFiccio from Abruzzi, Italy. He also had an older sibling who was Dan that we never met. Dan was came over from Italy with our grandmother. He then had two sisters, Anna DeFiccio D'Alfonso and Jenny DeFiccio Capuccio, and then our Uncle Jimmy, who was James DeFiccio. So of this whole crew, besides those of us that are here, there was only one other child from this particular family. My Aunt Anna had a son who was John, and he was a Christian brother, so of course he had no children, so it kind of is left to us to continue the traditions. And being late was one of them, so we're doing well. This is Mary Del Duca DeFiccio and our great-grandfather, Dominic DeFiccio. I'd always heard about my grandfather being a very slight person, and obviously this is a testimony to that. As I said, he came over here from Abruzzi about a year before his wife Mary and his son Dan came over. He was sent to kind of scout things out. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, was kind of, she was a little bit more vocal in the family than my grandfather was. He was quite shy and retiring. I don't know how many of you may have known my Uncle Jimmy, but if you did, he probably took after my Uncle Jimmy, or my Uncle Jimmy took after him quite a bit. Speaking of, this is James DeFiccio, the youngest of the children. He was a graduate of Temple University. I say here he's a soldier, a scholar, a teacher, a calligrapher, and a music enthusiast. Many people knew him as Mr. DeFiccio, the foreign language teacher at Hamilton High School. He taught French, Italian, and Spanish. He never lost his love of languages. As a matter of fact, Anna's son John also pursued degrees in foreign language and taught for a while at LaSalle High School in Philadelphia. Uncle Jimmy was a music enthusiast. Some of you may remember him as somebody who calligraphed some of the wedding albums that you've seen. He had beautiful handwriting. Even when he wasn't calligraphing, it was gorgeous. I can remember sitting with him in his living room, which was a very nicely laid out situation, immaculate, and in the middle of it was a lawn chair, because that's where Uncle Jimmy could find the best sound from the custom-made speakers that he had put together so he could hear the music best. He says that his love of music came from his father because our great-grandfather played the accordion. So Uncle Jimmy was a music enthusiast as well as everything else. No?
You're doing a good job.
Thank you. Uncle Jimmy had a love of the arts. Our grandfather had a love of the earth. I think in both cases, whether it be teaching or farming, they are callings. They're not professions that someone can really teach you as much as something that's deep down inside. And both of them did what they did extremely well. He just had this affinity for being able to grow just about anything he wanted to. And he passed that on to us. Even today, when I come to visit from Virginia, I love to smell the dirt. Now, we have dirt in Virginia, okay? But it doesn't smell like New Jersey dirt. It's not New Jersey soil. It's what creates the wonderful Jersey tomatoes and everything else. And I'll often say to Judee when I walk in the packing house, I love that smell. And it reminds me of my grandfather very often. Looking at my notes here. Not only was farming his occupation, but it was his passion. I mean, he exuded it. There were times in the day that were the most important to him. Among those times were the weather report, because all farmers function from the weather report. Of course, meals. And generally, he had a brood of grandchildren with him for meals. And those became very important to him as he grew his farm. Okay, this next one is a quote from Daniel Webster, and I found it and thought it was very appropriate to our grandfather. It says, "Let us not forget that the cultivation of the earth is the most important labor of man. When tillage begins, other arts will follow. The farmers, therefore, are the founders of civilization." There were three groups of people in the world as far as our grandfather was concerned. There were farmers, there were Italians, and there was everybody else, okay? And he imparted to us a love of being both a farmer and Italian, and I am still extremely proud of those roots. I married outside of the Italian heritage. My husband is a WASP. And I like to say to him that I'm a thoroughbred, okay? He's not, his lineage is a little mixed, but I'm a thoroughbred. So we were all thoroughbreds. Joseph married Anna Cimento in November of 1925. And this is a picture of them. I apologize, I do not remember, because we weren't there, who some of these, who the other two people were. They were their best man and a maid of honor. But this is a picture of our grandparents in their very early years. I'm especially curious at the way my grandfather looks because it doesn't look anything like any of the other pictures that I remember of him. But in this picture, he does remind us of Uncle Jimmy. Yeah, you can see that? Mm-hmm. The DeFiccios all had a nice round face. And anytime I gain weight, that's the first place it goes. Our grandparents were a team in everything. As you can see here, that's my grandmother and my grandfather sitting out under the cherry tree sorting apples. I had forgotten until I saw this picture that Grandpa smoked cigarettes. I remember when he went from the cigarettes to the cigars, which made my grandmother really happy. But I loved the smell of cigars. Uncle Junior smoked cigars. And I used to just love, even to this day, when I smell them, I think of them. So to me, cigars don't smell badly. But they had a very close relationship. I never remember my grandfather calling my grandmother anything other than Kid. That was her name, Kid. He referred to her when he was talking to us as Grandma, but anytime else, it was always Kid. And he and Kid had a really close working relationship. He was the quiet type, and Grandma was the kind who made you think that she was in charge. But we all knew who was really in charge. Okay, this is the family hierarchy here. So you see Joe and Anna, all right? Their firstborn was Joseph Jr., who was affectionately known as Junior his entire life. He married Minnie Capelli, and they had Judee. The second child was a daughter named Marie, and Marie passed away at the age of 2. I never really quite figured out what happened to Marie, if it was a brain tumor or something. My grandmother would just describe that she had a fall, and but it wasn't necessarily the fall that killed her. It was something to do with the dizziness, whatever, I don't know. For the rest of our lives, we heard about, or her life, we heard about Marie stories. And sometimes we'd say, oh, no, not again, here comes another Marie story. And then in 1985, when my mother lost my brother, I realized why my grandmother talked about Marie so much. Because when you have a child, you never forget them, no matter what happens or how much time goes in between. So Marie was deceased at the age of 2. After that came my Uncle Bobby, or Robert DeFiccio Sr. He was married to Carmelia LaMonica, and he had a lot of kids. Most of this crew here belongs to Uncle Bobby. And they lived on the farm, and while I got to come and go, they were there full time. So when I was thinking this was a neat novelty, there were days when they were thinking, there's nothing so neat about this, you know, we're here 24/7. But they learned the business very well. And then there was my mother, Virginia DeFiccio DeMarco. There are a lot of people who didn't even know that Junior and Bobby had a sister, because she was not as prominent as the other members of the family. She went off to nursing school and then married my father and moved away. My father is Paul DeMarco of Vineland, and my brother, Mick, who passed away in 1985, and myself. My grandfather emphasized family. Family, family, family. Family always came first. And to that end, that house always had an abundance of people. Not just visitors, although certainly you could come down at any time of the morning and find somebody already there. One of the first times I ever brought my husband, who was then my fiance, up to visit the family, it was New Year's Eve, and we had all gone out to eat, and we'd stayed at my grandmother's. And the next morning, he came downstairs, and there's my grandmother sitting there serving cranberry liqueur out of shot glasses. And there were other people in the house that I didn't even know who they were. But there were always people who were in that house, and there was never too many as far as she was concerned. One more was always great. This is a picture of her father, who was my great-grandpa DeFiccio, Cimento, and he lived with them after his wife passed away. And then in the next picture, we have my mother, with the long plaits, as she called them. Her cousin Loretta and my grandmother's brother Paulie, who Loretta was his daughter, and when he found himself without a wife to help him raise Loretta, they both moved to Grandmom's house. And from then on, Loretta lived at my grandmother's house. And so until she passed away, she basically considered my grandmother her mother. And for a while, she still called my grandfather Uncle Joe because her dad was still alive. But towards the end of her life, she also called him Daddy. So it was always Mother and Daddy. In the 1940s, my grandfather and Uncle Junior, I keep saying mine, it's really our grandfather, I'm sorry about that. Our grandfather and Uncle Junior found an outlet for the produce that was grown on the small farm that they had started. And that outlet was in Trenton. And so we started the tradition of from farm to market, and they started going to the Trenton Farmers Market, and that was located on, well, at first it was located on the Delaware, on the shores of the Delaware River. The city then had to kind of take that land.
They
No.
needed the property to expand Route 29. So they, at the time, sort of took over the property, but the farmers kind of had an idea that this might have happened. So they had already purchased a large tract of land on Spruce Street, a little farther north, still in Trenton, but on the border of Lawrence Township. And that's what came to be. They were able to sell parts of that land, some to the Ford Foundation, which then built some huge car dealerships and a spot next door that eventually they also sold. And with the money that they made from that, they were able to set up a new establishment on Spruce Street, which is still there today. They moved there in the 50s, and this picture is my dad and my Aunt Jenny at that market in the probably late 40s, early 40s.
Right. The division of labor on the farm pretty much went that Uncle Junior and Jenny would work the market, and Bobby and my grandfather stayed home and managed the fields. My grandmother was just kind of the liaison with everything that was going on. She was the head cook and bottle washer, so to speak. And then in many later years, we became apprentices to this whole operation.
That was Uncle Bobby, by the way.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, that was, let me go back, oops, forward, no. Yeah, this is Bobby here. This was a county agent.
We're not sure if that was John Rocket. Bill, you might know.
It's not John. I don't know.
Any ideas?
Could be Ray Kinsley with the light hair.
Ray Kinsley?
No.
Yeah.
It was the Soil Conservation.
Yeah, who was it?
It was somebody from the Soil Conservation Service, from the USDA.
Yeah.
It was,
Rick was able to figure that out. The
Right.
the present county agent was able to figure out who it was.
Oh, okay, well, that generated a lot of conversation among us, emails back and forth. So what happened is that we saw the growth of the farm that was Joseph DeFiccio and Sons. Okay. Oops. This is an example of how we had the growth of the farm take place. It went from a 10-acre enterprise to a we never did figure out how many acres.
Well, in its heyday in the 80s, it was about 500 acres of just about anything you can imagine. They were pretty much, my dad and my uncle were pretty much cutting edge at whatever was going on at the time, whether it was growing cantaloupe under hot tops, is that what it's called? Hot caps, growing corn under plastic, which was, they were about the first ones to do that, or whether it was expanding into value-added items before the term value-added had even come into play, when they started making apple cider, and my dad decided that we should also make candy apples. So that all started in or around the 60s. And they kept at it throughout the 70s and into the 80s, when they got to this point of about 500 acres and selling everywhere from Hamilton to Points North and Rockaway and Union and East Orange, and we're on the road just about every day delivering. So
This one is the market. Oops, going the wrong direction, sorry.
speaking of the delivering, Bobby was the young man that was on the truck all the time, from loading it to delivering. So do you want to say a couple words about what you did?
Well, basically, the day started, I was kind of thinking about this as we were going through all this. After I graduated high school, I was being prepped to run the market. And the day would begin as my father would be getting up at 5:30 or even 5 o'clock in the morning, or maybe earlier. And he walked down the hall, and there were three of us in the same bedroom. It was myself, Donnie, and Joey. And Donnie was still in school, but Joey was out of school a year after I was. And it would be the famous call, Bobby, Joey, wake up. So I'd be the good soldier, I'd be waking up. I would get over to the farm, get everything ready. Then, you know, that I would get everything ready to load the truck to go to Trenton. I'd go to my Uncle Junior's house, pick up everything that I needed to load the truck, all the orders and whatnot. And in the meantime, there'd be 5 other phone calls to the house. Joey, get up. Joey, get up. By the time I get back from Uncle Junior's house, Joey was just about strolling over. So, you know, we would load the truck. There were, you know, many days where I was on the road all day long, delivering to, you know, ShopRites, Super Freshes, A&Ps. As Judee said, we would go from Mount Holly all the way up to Rockaway, New Jersey. And some days in the middle of the summer, there were 2 trips being done a day. And then I think, you know, the guys can chime in here, but our day usually wasn't done at the end of the day, because then after that, we were out watching the winches at night where we took turns. So that was basically the day of going to Trenton, and that was usually from strawberry season all the way through Christmas, and then even in the wintertime, it was 2 to 3 days a week. So.
I remember one time, again, prior to being married, but I was engaged to my husband, and it wasn't the same time as the cranberry liqueur, but I took him to the farm for the first time. And in our area of Virginia, the southeastern area of Virginia, farming is small business, and it's not the type of produce that we grow here. So I told him I was going to take him to my uncle's farm. Well, when I took Bill to the farm and he came into the packing houses and saw all the machinery and the conveyor belts and everything else, and then my Uncle Bobby treated him to a stroll through the cooler, which was this huge walk-in refrigerator, essentially. He came to understand why New Jersey is known as the Garden State, because farming was decidedly different here than it was where we are from now, and he was unaccustomed to something like this. So I always had a great pride in telling people about my grandparents and then my uncle's farm. So that was something that was a pretty neat thing to do. In this picture here, we see kind of trying to give us both sides of this. The Korean War, of course, took a toll on everyone. Uncle Bobby went off to the Army, and while he was doing his thing, my mother was in nursing school, and so essentially that left the farm to the management of Uncle Junior. And so he kept things going along with my father along with Judy's grandfather, until the war was over and everyone returned home. So he really kept things flowing while life kind of got in the way of so many other things. Yeah.
Back.
Also, in the right-hand picture with my uncle, there's an exchange program that was going on years ago. My father and my uncle took part in it, and they brought in college students who were interested in agriculture program from other countries. They were Koreans, Filipinos, Polish, I believe. And what they would do is they would stay on the farm for 1 to 2 years and learn how to do modern farming techniques, so then they could take them back to their countries. And actually, I believe about 5 years ago, one of the gentlemen from Korea actually got back in touch with my mother. And after he had been here, went back to Korea, he ended up becoming a professor and then was retired as professor in college teaching agriculture.
Being a small community, everyone knew everyone else, or so it seemed anyway. And so even before certain members of our family became members of our family, they were friends with members of our family. And here's just a quick example of that. Over here we have my mother at one of her wedding showers that was given by my Aunt Carm, because Aunt Carm was one of her bridesmaids well before she was Aunt Carm. As a matter of fact, Uncle Bobby and Aunt Carm had their first date when they came to visit my mother in the hospital when she had me. So I was really responsible for the rest of you. Aunt Minnie over here was my brother's godmother at least 10 years before she would become Mrs. Joseph DeFiccio Jr. So we had an association among family members even prior to being family members, because we all lived in the same community, or they all lived in the same community, shared a lot of the same resources, went to the same churches and schools and so forth. Okay, here we have a couple of pictures of weddings. And then I believe, Judy, you have your parents over there? You do, okay. Anyway, Aunt Carm and Uncle Bobby and my mother and father, they married. One of the jokes always was in our household, my mother couldn't find a good time to get married. And finally, she said, well, okay, what about August? And my grandfather said, that's peach season. And my grandmother looked at him and said, and he said, okay, we can do it in August. But every time she came up with a date, it was like, oh, well, that was this season and that was that season. So it was a challenge to find something even to be able to, you know, a date to get married. But obviously, that occurred in 1955.
My parents got married in December, so obviously my mother didn't have too much to say about the season. December 1st was a safe time. The story of how they actually had their first date. My father used to work for Rice, driving a tractor. And apparently my mother and my Aunt Mary were pretty good sweet potato planters. So they were planning on the back, and my father was driving, and my mother said, come on, hurry this up, I got a date tonight, I gotta get out of here. So my father says, well, you never give me a chance, and she says, well, you've never asked. And so he asked, and that's how that began. In December of 1962, they were married.
And although Judee obviously would not remember the wedding, I certainly do. It was a lot of fun. Then the grandchildren came along, and these 4 lovely children were the first. There's myself, followed by my brother, I was born in 1956, my brother was in 58. Exactly 1 month later, Bobby came along, and then after that, the next year, we added Joey, and it kind of went on from there. It seemed that every year or two, we were we were adding another worker to the farm. And so that's how the labor force there grew, was by adding children to the roster. And so we all had our fun times on the farm, apprenticing. Jerry felt sure that he was going to spend the rest of his life making boxes. He was very good. He and Judee worked very well together at that. Joey would sometimes get lost out in the field on the tractor, and we'd have to go find him. Bobby was on the trucks. I used to get to I used to be able to pack blueberries until I was fortunate enough the business at Trenton was busy enough that I got to go to Trenton, and I loved that because when I was home packing on the farm, first of all, blueberries are round and they rolled around a lot. It was kind of hard to get those little things down. And secondly was the fact that I was right within my grandmother's purview. And so anytime there was downtime, I was getting another lesson on how to clean or how to cook or how to iron. And so when I was able to finally get away from that, I was a really happy camper. I have to say to this day, though, that those lessons come in very, very handy. As grandchildren, we got to venture where our parents dared not go. And you can see here some of the calamity that surrounded some of our times on the farm. I'm told that this particular picture here where I'm lining up the strawberry crates was being done, I was being kind of pushed along by my Uncle Bobby and my Uncle Junior, even though they knew my grandfather was heading in with the flatbed ready to deliver more strawberries, but I was busy going at it. There are several pictures of me on this particular day. I was quite full of myself. I'm pretty sure that this was when my brother was born, so I was staying at the farm and being indulged by everyone. And here, Joey's letting me sit on his head on the flatbed. Even though we clowned around a lot, we also did a lot of work. Anybody want to chime in? No.
You're doing wonderful.
And of course, the tradition of family was something that was born out through our generation and our children's generation. And so it truly was a family farm. We were all involved in it, and we all got to feel some kind of ownership with it, and we all had a great pride in it. These are Bobby's children. They are now grown with children of their own. This is a very young Bobby here. And Judee, and this is Uncle Bobby with Joey and Bobby, yeah, and some dog. There was always a dog around. And that's me helping do strawberries. There was never not at least one dog on the farm. As a matter of fact, my children would later name our grandmother Lucky Grandma. And when we asked them one time why she was Lucky Grandma, we were told it was because she was lucky enough to have 2 dogs. But dogs were man's best friend and certainly my grandfather's best friend. This picture is one of the most uncharacteristic pictures of my grandfather that I've ever seen. He is watering my grandmother's flower beds. And it's so uncharacteristic because the flowers were Grandmom's department and the farm was his. And as I looked at it, and Don and I talked about it, was what, 1966 about, that he retired?
Yes.
Okay. If I look closely, I can see the expression on his face. And this tells me that pretty much he was doing this out of an obligation, not because he wanted to. He really would have preferred to be in the packing house or somewhere else. And now we have a new era that Judy's going to tell you about.
Well, those pictures are definitely from two different times, but the picture on the right is my father and my uncle at a very young age. In fact, Don commented, 1948, that's one of the few pictures of my Uncle Bobby with hair. Anyway, that was even before they really started as, they were DeFiccio and Sons at that point. And the picture on the left is probably one of the first trucks that actually had the writing on it, and that was the classic truck that my dad used to drive to Trenton every day. Bobby would drive a bigger truck for all the deliveries, and that was the truck my dad took to Trenton. And when Bob talked about coming to my house in the morning to get the slips or whatever, and Lori spoke of all the people who would be in my grandmother's house, in my kitchen, my mom's kitchen in the morning, she was usually making coffee for my dad, Joe Battaglia, and Larry Herrera. And there was a routine every morning. Mr. Battaglia was usually there first, or if Larry were there first and we're sitting at the table, Mr. Battaglia would walk in, take the hat off his head, because he wouldn't take his hat off when he came in the house. And Mr. Battaglia would take the hat off his head, don't you have any manners? And put the hat down, and they would talk about what they were going to do during the day, what the weather was like, and that went on for about an hour, and then everybody would go about to continue their day by 7 a.m. probably. So they talked about watching the winches and the pumps all night long. That's one of the hundreds of acres of corn that DeFiccio brothers used to grow in the 70s and 80s. That is scaled down a lot now. We grow probably about 15 or 20 acres of Pineland corn. That's when people used to buy crates of corn. It was not unusual to see that. Pretty much everybody would buy a dozen ears. Now people come in and ask for 3 or 2. So things have changed a lot. And we've met those changes, and we just kind of keep going with the flow. Another classic picture is any picture with my father and my uncle working in the packing house, and there's usually someone standing there talking to them. It was pretty much the routine that if you wanted to talk to either of them, you had to catch them in the packing house during the workday. Everybody was involved one way or another. This was in later years. My mom decided she really wanted to grow raspberries. So she's on her flatbed truck. You probably can't see it, but there's probably raspberries on the back of that. And behind her is my Aunt Rosie. We used to call my mom and her sister and her sister-in-law, my Aunt Mary, my Aunt Rosie, the 3 amigos, because they would be out there every day from like 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, picking the raspberries that my dad would take to Trenton the next day. And then even though Aunt Ginny wasn't at the market all the time, we'd recruit her. That's the bottom picture. She's making blueberry pancakes. We have these special days at the market where we try to promote certain products, and whenever we try to promote blueberries, we usually do blueberry pancakes. So that's her dishing out some blueberry pancakes. And then the picture at the top is greenhouses with automation, which was another thing that my dad kind of expanded into. Aunt Carm managed the greenhouses at DeFiccio Brothers, and my mom was pretty much hands-on when it became Pineland Farms. And it's just my mom with, my mom could grow anything. She could put a stick in the ground and get it to do something, but that was one of the poinsettias that she raised, I under her direction, but she could really do it all. And that's a classic picture of my dad in Trenton, where he was, he just loved it there, and customers loved him as well. When he was on the farm more than in Trenton, and I was spending time in Trenton, people would ask about him all the time. And he came up one day with a load of produce, and he hadn't been there in years. and I'm standing there waiting on customers, and there's two older gentlemen are standing there, and one's telling the other one, "Is it him? It's not him. Is it him? It's him." So I let him go on for a while, and then I said, "It's him." And they look at me like, "It's really him?" I said, "Yeah, it's him." So they came in the back, and it was like he was holding court that day. He had like this line of people just talking to him. He finally was like, "I could go." But anyway, that was probably one of the last days he spent at the market, and he had a great day. And seeing all the people see him and seeing him happy and all of his customers happy was a really great thing. When he passed away, I got letters and cards from people that remembered him, remembered coming to the market with their parents or their grandparents, and knew him as the Apple Man, or I always remember your dad giving me samples of cider. He really had a gift for not selling anything, just being there. He was just always, he made himself part of the family. He knew his customers, he knew their kids, he knew people's names. If there was a kid crying, he could get the kid to stop and be laughing in like 2 minutes. It was just amazing to see him at that market. And this is just a sample of, those are actually Bobby's 2 children.
No, isn't that Billy?
I think it's both.
We think it's better.
Oh, really?
Which is his children.
We know the girl is definitely Kristen. And I think that's at the market. It wasn't unusual to see Kristen there waiting on customers when she was that age and even younger. She would take naps underneath the table. So it's never too early to get involved when you're a DeFiccio.
Tell them why she's there. My wife worked for us at the farmer's market. So when my kids were small and I had left the farm, I moved up to the Trenton area, but my wife still went to the farmer's market and brought my kids there, and she helped out every once in a while, and that's why I guess the picture was taken.
And then the slide underneath was my Aunt Ginny was helping to make candy apples that day, and someone else had just happened by. So chances were, if you just stopped by the market or the farm and we happened to be busy doing something, you were probably going to end up recruited and helping. Not us. And I'm going to let Lori kind of wrap this all up.
Everything that we got to share with each other and then with you brought us back to the fact that there was one place that we all loved, and that would be Oak Road. And we loved being there, we loved the farm, and we certainly miss those who helped make that all possible. And so we want to acknowledge our grandparents, Joe and Anna, Judy's parents, Junior and Minnie, Bobby and Joey and Donnie and Bridget and Jerry's parents, Carm and Bobby, and my parents, Ginny and Paul. And we would also like to acknowledge our 2 younger cousins and siblings, Kenny and Nick, who are no longer with us, but were certainly all part of that particular activity.
Just want to thank everybody for coming too. It was great to see you all here tonight. And thank you again for letting us do this.
Any questions before we wrap up?
Thank you, there's Judy.
Token of our appreciation for the service
How many of us each month? Not for
The next wedding. Well, we kind of, it was a joint effort, but I put it was about. We're gonna have your fifth. Scanning pictures back, putting them in there, so yes.
Yeah.